next individual has a broad experience with water. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Dan Birch. Dan Birch comes with a set of skills that works specifically in a key area of negotiating water or mediating water. We talked about how some of the discussions with water can sometimes get contentious. If you've never had a contentious discussion about water, you've probably never been to one of the head gates here in the San Luis Valley. So I'll invite you out anytime. You know, thankfully for today, we had the water symposium and everyone can be here because we're not in the irrigation season yet. So we just left Craig. And so I'm not going to put him on the spot to see if maybe he'll open it up early. So you got to wait till April 1st today. But bienvenidos, Dan. Welcome to the San Luis Valley. We're very happy that you're here. Dan Birch comes over with 20 years of experience in water resources planning, management, and engineering. He's a trained facilitator and mediator, and he's been involved in several multi-stakeholder environmental issues, policy issues, as well as decision-making issues that impact several different basins. Dan has served as the Deputy General Manager of the Colorado River Water Conservation District. He serves as a water referee out of Division 6 Water Court. So I'm not sure if you have the same issues up there as you do down here, Dan, but maybe we could compare notes sometimes. But that Division 6 covers Yampa, the White and North Platte River basins. Dan has broad contacts in several areas in the water world. He has served on several boards and committees, including the president for the Colorado Water Congress back in 2001. He's been on the Interbasin Compact Committee, the Yampa White Basin Roundtable, the Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District, and the Colorado River Water Conservation District. So Dan knows water. He comes with a lot of experience in water. And so for his program today, Dan, I know he's going to introduce us to how we can have some of those tough and challenging conversations, but maybe not with shovels and pitchforks at each other, hopefully.
But with whiskey, I think.
But with whiskey, see, the whiskey comes back again, and that's where we need those ice cubes. So thank you, Dan.
Yeah, I wanted to participate in that, but I couldn't. Thanks, Armando.
Yes.
You know, I tell my friends in the Yampa, I'm now living in the Colorado Basin and outside of Fruita, and I was glad to see that there isn't anybody else from the Colorado Basin, so I can tell a lot of lies and stories, and it won't come back to haunt me. But I tell my friends in the Colorado Basin that compared to the San Luis Valley, we don't really have any problems. The San Luis Valley, I think, really does have some very serious problems. So it's a pleasure to be with you today and talk about communications. I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone. I'm usually talking about water policy and technical issues, and this is a little bit of a departure for me today. So I apologize in advance if I'm sounding a little rusty or my speaking doesn't come forward as straightforward as possible. But it is a pleasure to be here, and I'm very glad. I wish, as Rio said, I wish we could all be together, and hopefully at some point in the future, I'll be able to be down in the valley joining you all. Thanks to Rio for inviting me, and Rio actually helped a tremendous amount getting this presentation together today, and everything good about it, I think Rio's responsible for. Again, I just want to reiterate, feel free to drop questions and comments into the chat. I'm going to spend about a third of the time today talking about communications and talking about best practices. And then we've got a series of questions we want to go through just out of curiosity and again, to get you all engaged in the process. And then we really want to spend about a third of our time going through some of the questions and comments that we have. So with no further ado, I hope this doesn't come across as something kind of pie in the sky. But I did want to relay a little bit of a story here, and it's a personal experience for me that I had, but it kind of demonstrates some of the issues and some of the best practices that we can use in our communications. And I have to tell you all that I'm an engineer, and that through much of my career kind of informed how I proceeded with things. And those of you that know anything about engineering know that when you study engineering, you do that from the perspective of solving problems. Every single course you have has to do with solving a problem. You're given a set of facts, you're giving a set of engineering principles, and importantly, formula to apply. And it's a solitary experience. You solve the problem. And us engineers, we go into the world with that perspective. You know, and there's a time and a place for that. But really, in this day and age, the approaches that are being taken are more one of trying to reach consensus. It becomes more a group process of trying to solve problems and not the solitary engineer. And to do that, you really need to have, if you want to reach consensus, if you want to solve problems, you really need to cultivate and develop and grow your communication skills. I think this applies in particular in the San Luis Valley, where you're dealing with some very difficult issues, and I don't presume to have any answers for what those solutions are. And it also applies with what's going on in our society and really our country and our world. And you know, we've seen that demonstrated in spades the last few years, especially in the last year. Our communications are kind of devolving to being very caustic and very corrosive. And a lot of it has to do with the form that we take those communications, and utilizing social media, but even things like sending texts and tweets and even emails can be corrosive. So I think this is important. I think it's important in the Valley, and I think it's important in our larger lives and our larger worlds. So the time we have today, I want to talk about some things that will hopefully give you pause to think and think about ways that we can communicate a little bit differently. And this is just going to be a taste and it's sampling. And it's really just what I've learned mostly from not so much my professional life, but from my personal life, where I've devoted a great deal of time and energy to that. And interestingly, I got going down this path, not as an engineer, but when I was on the school board in Steamboat Springs, and I was the school board member responsible for doing collaborative negotiations over wage and benefits. And once or twice a year, there would be 20 of us sitting in a room, sitting in a circle, figuring out what the wage and benefit package needed to be. So as a board member, staff from every part of the school district, and we had to hammer out a solution, and we did that. And I used to make fun of it to my friends, but what I ended up finding out over time is it's very difficult, it's very time consuming, there's no guarantee of success, but in the end, we ended up really solving some pretty thorny problems, and we never failed, and it was important to do that. So that's really informed my world as I've gone forward. I also want to say that I have a ton of experience, and experience is code word for I've made a lot of mistakes in my communications over the years. There's one particular example though, and again, this is my personal life, where things actually worked out pretty well, and I was kind of pleased with how it worked out, and I was happy of the way I approached it. So this is a little story about the building of our house here outside of Fruita. But before we get to that, just to get you engaged a little bit, and for me to know a little bit more about you all, we want to ask a couple questions. So, you know, my experience with the San Luis Valley goes back to the AWDI days, and I think the Valley is really recognized as coming together to oppose some pretty major diversions out of the Valley. The San Luis Valley is really recognized, I think, historically as a community that's come together. And so how alive or in jeopardy is that community cohesiveness today? So take a few seconds here to answer those questions. They're or point out which one you think the valley is at. And very much alive as it was with AWDI. Is alive but in jeopardy. Maybe there are cracks that are showing, or is it not at all what it was? Okay, let's go ahead and see what the results are for that. Interesting. So the majority is really, it's alive, but it's in jeopardy. I think that's a very interesting result. Let's see. Second question, how important do you believe effective communications are to help the Valley work through its water challenges? From critically important, important, not necessarily important, not important, or not important at all. Wow, that's really interesting. Critically important, that's the vast majority of the responses. Nobody said it was not important at all, or not very important at all. Great, thank you. Bear with me, I'm having a little bit of a technical issue. So this is the little story. It's the little story of our little community here. In this, it's a former sheep ranch that I live on, that I'm going to call Bedrock for the purpose of this, and you'll understand in a second. But about 5 or 6 years ago, my wife and I started planning the construction of our home. It was going to be out in this kind of flat, scrubby area that you see there, and in the background is the Uncompahgre Plateau, and Pollock Canyon goes through the sandstone up to the top of the Uncompahgre Plateau. Very scenic area. And we were going to build our house there. And I wanted to be very transparent with our neighbors about what we were planning to do. So we got to the point where we had kind of conceptual level sketches of the property. And I went out there, and like a good engineer, I staked the corners of all the structures, and I invited neighbors to come over and shared with them what we were thinking about. And my neighbors, Jack and Judy, came over, and Jack and Judy, in no uncertain terms, said, "We don't like this at all. This is an awful place to put your house." And my first response that I thought but didn't vocalize gladly was, well, now, wait a second. This is Mesa County, Colorado, the land of the free and the home of the brave. I'll put my house wherever the heck I want to put it. Thank you very much. But we ended up talking about it, and I got to understand what their issue is. And this is their home. They live in a cave. They're part of the cave dwellers in our little subdivision. They only have one view out of their house. And it was going to look right at the back of my house, and they weren't happy about that at all. And so they wanted me to move where I was going to put the house. Long story short, I won't get into all the details, but we were able to do that. And thanks to the cooperation of one of our other neighbors, we were able to put it in a different location that was much better for us. It was much better for Jack and Judy, and really was much better for all of our other neighbors. So this really brings to mind some areas where I think it points out some good practices in communication, and I just want to highlight those a little bit for you today. First is be open and curious. Ask a lot of questions when you're communicating with somebody. What ended up happening in this result, it was a very potentially difficult and contentious item, but what actually resulted was something that was much better for everybody concerned. So good things can happen as the result of conflict and disagreement. Second thing is to avoid surprises. Imagine what would have happened if I didn't meet with my neighbors ahead of time, and I simply went out there and Next thing my neighbors knew, the excavator was out there starting construction on our house. Boy, once that's happened, then things really elevate. It's much more difficult to carve out a solution. So um, I think avoiding surprise and being upfront and being transparent is really important. I had a water court case that came up a few years ago that was in the upper portions of the Yampa. And it was a case where somebody was trying to decree some water rights to some tailwater they were picking up. And you know, the accident in agriculture, in irrigated agriculture, is that the ditch that serves one property has to go across the neighbor upstream. And this guy, Billy, I can't remember his last name, he was a character. He was also in the excavating business. And so he would go onto his neighbor's property and just literally run amok, excavating all these ditches, trying to pick up water from his tailwater coming off of his neighbor's property. Of course, it really made everybody quite angry. And he filed a case to try and adjudicate these water rights. And everybody and their brother came out and opposed his case. So he had surprised his neighbors, and it didn't work out very well. I'll tell you at some point what ended up happening to Bill. It's kind of funny and sad in a way. This I think is really, it's an old saw, but I think it's really one of the most important aspects of communications. You can be really hard on the issues, but it's much better to be soft on people. You know, my neighbors, Jack and Judy, they did not hesitate to really weigh in and say they did not like what I was doing. But it didn't become a personal matter. And so it's not a matter of papering over or ignoring contentious issues at all. It really is just a different way of proceeding, that you're going to really focus on what the issues are and be hard on those and not be hard on the other people. And in the case of my neighbors, I really wanted to maintain good relations with them. And if you start to get hard on people, that just becomes really difficult to do. We see this so much in social media and other, that people use labels, they'll speak disrespectfully, they'll use generalizations, and that is just one of those things that's really caustic for effective communications. Listen to understand. A lot of times when you're listening, you're really listening and you're just thinking about how you're going to respond. Instead, if you can just really listen without trying to engage and just take in what other people are saying, I think that's helpful. It's also helpful in listening if you can kind of acknowledge what somebody is saying and repeat it back to them. Helps them know they're being heard and helps them know that you get it. Look for interests instead of positions. My neighbors could have come in and said, you know, there is no way you're going to build that house there. We're going to fight it tooth and nail. That's a position. And instead, what they led with, to their great credit, was their interest. They said, look, this is the only, I'm going to be looking at the back of your house. I don't want to do that. We could work with that. Positions oftentimes just create a divide that you can never get past. I think in the San Luis Valley, the thing that folks might want to think about is, you know, you could take positions between surface water irrigators and groundwater users, and you could develop positions with regard to that. On the other hand, you could really look at how you have interests in common about, you know, needing and using the water for all these different uses in the valley, agricultural and otherwise, environmental, recreation. And in that regard, you have an interest that really unites you all. I didn't try and change my neighbor's mind about where they were coming from. And one of the reasons for that was I really wanted to maintain a relationship with them. My intention is to be carried feet first out of my home. And I was going to live with them for a long time. And just imagine what would have happened if I built my house there. They would have hated me forever. And I didn't try and change their mind. Well, okay, initially I did, but I got over that. Sometimes it's just not important to try and change somebody's minds. And in our neighborhood, people really have a range of viewpoints on things, and a lot of which I don't agree with. They're great neighbors. I can pick up the phone anytime, and they would do the same, and they would be in my front door in a minute to help me out with something. So a lot of times it's just not important to change. There's other things that are more important, I should say, than trying to change somebody's mind. Neither avoid conflict or seek it. I'm an avoider of conflict, and a lot of times that's just not good. And people out there who just go out of their way, it seems, to find conflict. My neighbors weren't trying to find conflict. They had a legitimate issue. And again, I think this is so important. And this is so applicable in the San Luis Valley. I think it's really important for the Valley to maintain the relationships, neighbor to neighbor, community member to community member. Now, in all situations, this may not apply, but I think in the case of what's going on in the San Luis Valley, it certainly does. So we're going to get to some more questions again. Again, please feel free to put in chat what you've got. So here's our first question. What's your personal experience with conflict in the Valley? Numerous and sometimes rather heated, occasional, not really so much, or you've heard about them but haven't really been in one yourself? Wow. So pretty even split between numerous and occasional. The other, well, basically you could say a third, and a third between numerous, occasional, and you've certainly heard about them. How well did these conversations turn out for the people involved? So were there shovels involved that were not in the earth? On the end of more contentious, at the other end, issues were resolved pretty much amicably, and good mutual feelings resulted. Some resolution, okay feelings, but there's still remaining issues. Not much change, kind of a stalemate. Things changed for the worse and left with sour feelings, or last, maybe bridges were burned as a result. So what was your experience with those conversations? How'd they turn out? Okay. So we're kind of in the middle of the spectrum here. Kind of a slight majority. You said there's some resolution and okay feelings, but there's more work to be done. Then most is kind of a stalemate. I guess the good news in that there weren't a lot of hard feelings generated. Take that as a positive. What are the main points of contention or challenges that you see regarding water in the Valley? And which of these issues do you think are the most important while still being potentially contentious? And Rio, a quick question for you, if you don't mind. Did you intend, when you put this together, to just be one answer, or rank all, or click all that apply?
I believe this one, it's multiple choice. You can click all that apply.
Okay, so good, that makes sense. So click all that apply there. Groundwater pumping, depleting surface water supplies, the state that Craig's going to reduce groundwater pumping, meeting compact obligations, the issue of export from the Valley to the Front Range, purchase of Valley land and water that we're going to be talking about on the next panel discussion, and the need for more water information and better understanding of complex issues. Okay, let's see what we've got. gosh, it's kind of all of the above. The biggest one being purchasing water and possible water speculation. Then water export, groundwater pumping, less so meeting compact obligations and need for more community information. So other than that, the Valley doesn't have much going on with water issues. Next question. What's your level of support for groundwater management subdistricts in the Valley? From strong support to support, kind of neutral, don't support, strongly opposed to don't know, need more information about the subdistricts. Wow, interesting. It's definite strong majority for of support of the subdistricts. And really not so much strong opposition. It sounds like people recognize that this is something that needs to be done. Next question. What's your level of support for keeping the region's water resources in the Valley? This might be a little bit of a hanging curveball. I don't know. Strong support, neutral, don't support keeping water in the Valley, strongly oppose, need to know more about the issues. Okay, let's see what we've got. Shock. I am just shocked. Very, very strong support. Nobody opposes it. Okay, next question, which is our penultimate question. I just love the chance to use that word, as Rio knows. Do you believe Valley-based communications workshop or workshops could improve the dialogue and facilitate community problems solving from strongly support, neutral, and do not support? Pretty good support for doing that. Okay, and our last question, this should not come as a surprise given the question. How likely are you to participate in a workshop? So would you personally support and participate in a communication workshop for the Valley? And again, this would be geared at improving communication skills. So yes, likely, neutral, probably not. Would rather get another hole in my head. Would rather have a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. Okay. Wow, very interesting. That's great. That's great to hear. So pretty strong support for that. We're gonna hold all of you accountable for that. We're keeping a record of names, and we're going to attribute this to 87% of the people. Okay, so I think we've done a pretty good job. So we've got Rio. I don't know how much time you want to take. If you want to catch up a little bit here, let me know, or Armando.
Yeah,
but
we
we've
have a
got
few
some
more
time.
minutes. I don't know if you have some more time. I don't know if there's any specific questions. We have about 5 minutes before we take our first break. So if there is some time, or if there's anything key that anyone saw that might be asked of Dan, I know, Dan, we're going to need your help. We need individuals who are going to help to mediate productive solutions that, again, not only benefit for the now, but benefit for the future. And it's going to take a team effort. It's no one individual that's going to be able to solve all the problems. As Craig indicated, as part of his program, is that these are challenging situations. They're challenging issues, and sometimes there aren't really good answers to some of those issues. And it becomes a trade-off sometimes. Some people, if they get benefit one place, some people lose in another place. And so I thought you highlighted some really key components within your program that talked about how do we not let it get to a position of getting emotional to where we get so grounded in our position that we don't even want to talk to each other. Or how do we get to a point where we're not focusing on the content to be productive? We're just mad at someone because we get defensive. And I think those become the key parts to facilitate and make people understand, when am I getting into that mode of no longer being productive, of no longer communicating. I've always thought that maybe there should be a development of a set of guiding principles for water out of the San Luis Valley that can make it more objective. So instead of it being my perspective or your perspective, we go to these guiding principles that we agreed on prior to having an issue and see which ones benefit those guiding principles the most, because those become foundation principles that we agreed to before.
One thing I forgot to mention about communications, and you get angry. You can't. Anger is a human emotion. You can't deny that, and it's going to come up for people from time to time. The important thing in communications is if your button's being pushed and if you're activated, if you're seeing red, that's not the time to send an email or a text message.
Don't hit send sometimes. Don't hit send.
Yeah, it just emails and texts in particular, people can completely misread what your intentions are to begin with. But if you add being hot at the same time, it just isn't going to help the situation.
And there could be a challenge in there, because when you send something out of context, as you indicate, it may be taken a different way than you intended, but yet it has lingering feelings or lingering issues that bring the parties together. The other part, and I've worked in management for a long time, from a corporate level to small business to local government to higher education and academia, is if you're frustrated, you're mad, send the email to yourself, read through it first, see if it calms you down before you actually hit send to somebody else, because that may change your perspective on you reading it instead of sending it. I know my emails sometimes have that effect. When I'm sending it, I know everything I'm saying. When I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, I missed that, or I shouldn't have said that. And so that could also be very, very productive. But Dan, I think a lot of what you indicated as part of your program is facilitation that we need when discussing these issues, especially when we're talking about people's livelihoods. They're very connected to people's lives. And again, we talked about those perspectives that I mentioned in my earlier monologue, where the economic perspectives, the lifestyle perspectives, the community's perspectives. Well, people are very passionate about all of those in different ways. And so that can create some of this adversarial approach or adversarial relationships. And a lot of the content I think you mentioned could be very productive and serve all of us really well.
Yeah, I think those are great points, Armando. Rio, I'm sorry, I'm not seeing anything in chat, but is there any particular issue or question? I think we still have a few minutes here.
Okay, I got a couple here. Or Rio, go ahead if you had one.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just maybe merge a couple. There's some questions about, and maybe Craig could pop in here too, because we didn't get to ask questions of him, but concerns that, okay, the state caused some of these problems by failing to enforce the doctrine of prior appropriation on the wells in the past. And now maybe the well owners were not feeling accountable, surface users have suffered, and now they, have a tough future ahead. So, and then, also related to that, what are the approaches state regulators will turn to if the sustainability goals remain unmet?
Sure. Yeah. So the comment about the state causing the issue, that is something that I've heard before. So it's definitely not something new to me. So, but just real quickly, what I wanted to point out is that prior to 1969, the state didn't have any way to administer groundwater. In 1969, the laws kind of changed and allowed the state engineer that ability to administer groundwater in relation to surface water streams. So it changed in 1969. In 1972, so just 3 years after that, the state engineer did put in a moratorium on any new wells here in most parts of the valley. So for the last almost 50 years, we have had a moratorium on new water uses, and we did that within 3 years of being able to do that. Now, obviously, there's some different opinions as to whether we did enough, even with not being able to have those administrative authorities. But just wanted to put that out there, that we actually haven't allowed new wells in most parts of the valley for almost 50 years. So, and then Rio, I'm sorry about the second question. What was that?
What are the state's response going to be if sustainability goals remain unmet?
So as I said in my presentation, the sub-districts have to do their annual replacement plans every year, and they have to show the state engineer that they will be able to meet those sustainability goals and replace their depletions. If at the point in time that the state engineer doesn't believe that they can actually meet those goals, and it's pretty clear that they can't meet those goals, then at that point in time, he will deny that annual replacement plan, and the sub-district wells can't pump until they get something else in place.
Greg, if they're close, even if they haven't met the sustainability at the end of that timeline, if they're close, could there be an approval of that ARP that extends it maybe a couple of years, that they're trending towards that? Or is it pretty definitive at the end of that timeline?
It's pretty definitive, and the reason is because it's a water court decree, and so they actually have to meet that goal. So one of the things I think that the sub-district number 1 is looking at is potentially trying to amend that decree maybe, and looking at other ways that they can maybe change that goal, or maybe extend it out a little bit farther, Armando, like you had said, but that'll take a court case.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Dan, I think we got a couple minutes. Avril had an interesting point, and Avril mentioned that, what do you think about a stakeholder map and identifying all the different stakeholders that you could possibly try to flesh out or identify in the valley, and see, are there overlapping interests? Are there common aligned interests? Are these oppositional interests? But I thought it was an interesting point. I don't know if you've used anything like a mapping or stakeholder mapping approach to kind of see who are all the stakeholders out there. I went to Colorado Congress for the past 3-4 years as part of the Rio Grande Water Conservation District. And one of the stakeholders that really surprised me in presence was all the municipalities. And to me, coming from a Southern Colorado agriculture area, I'm thinking it's farmers, ranchers, thinking about all this. And there it was a lot of municipal managers trying to see how they're going to get water for people. So I just saw that comment in there, and I thought that was interesting. I didn't know if you had any comments or thoughts about maybe stakeholder mapping.
I'm not familiar with it at all. I don't really have anything to offer as far as that goes. I'm curious and interested about it.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea as well. So thank you, Avril, for putting that out there. We maybe have time for one more. Are we ready for break, Rio? What do you think?
I just would say,
let's go to break. Give everyone an extra minute.
Yeah.
All right, good deal.
Be all back in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, you've been patient with us, and you've been with us for an hour and 20 minutes to start us off. Before you go, because I know you're anxious again to get that refill of coffee or find the nearest restroom or facilities, I do want to recognize that these initiatives don't happen on their own. It takes a lot of contributions from a lot of people. I really gave a lot of credit to Rio, and I want to reinforce that. Without her directorship at the Salazar Rio Grande del Norte Center, things like this would not happen. But it also has happened because of grant funds and sponsors such as the Gates Family Foundation, Colorado Water Conservation Board, also referred to as CWCB, the Rio Grande Water Conservation District, which is going strong, even though as Rio mentioned that Cleve Simpson is now our citizen legislator as a state senator. We have our deputy general manager in Amber Pacheco, and so she's making sure that we're staying on top of all of these issues. The Headwaters Alliance out of Creede, Colorado, Trout Unlimited in Colorado, here in the Colorado San Luis Valley, the San Luis Valley Irrigation District and the Rio Grande Reservoir, the San Luis Valley Water Conservation District, and then finally the Conejos, I'm looking at, the Conejos Water Conservancy District. I just want to make sure I got that accurate. And so thank you to all of you. And if you want to donate, Rio has set up a foundation connection with the Adams State Foundation that you can contribute directly to the Salazar Rio Grande del Norte Center. And I'm sure Angie or Rio will put that link where you can donate in there.
Bye.